Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sunday. Um, so, I have amazing news. The book is written. How exciting! I did the epilogue, did the final deal, wrote the final word line. It was everything I wanted it to be, so I'm very excited. Very, very excited. Okay, so next steps, of course, is editing. So I still needed to get all the future chapters that you guys haven't heard yet all set up and ready to go. So Harold is going to be finishing the editing on those. That'll then be passed to Dawn, and Dawn will finish up the last of the book. I, meanwhile, am going to start over from the beginning because I did all my work now on the rest of the end of the book. I'm going to start over from the beginning, and I am going to be doing a fresh read on everything myself, looking for any flow issues and all that sort of stuff. So once I get those chapters done, then what I'm going to do is create a folder for beta readers. I will post the folder along with the video probably this coming week, and then everybody can go out and just read to your heart's content. Make any changes. I'll talk about what I'm looking for in the little video if you're interested. So there we go. Um, and then I hate editing. I do. I do. I love the creative side. Oh my god, the editing! I could just. Oh yeah, yeah. Oh Lord. So anyway, so my goal this time is to get the editing done as fast as possible, which should make it as painless as possible, and then we can get through to the fun, which is the next book. So anyway, should be a lot of fun. I'll also probably talk a little bit later about kind of the fourth book coming up and what I'm wanting to do with that. And I'll do that in one of the other videos. Okay. Anyway, for today, so we finished Minor Detail last week. Um, and so I will read just a little tiny bit of that, and then we'll start on the next chapter. All right, so this was perfect. Not only was magic sloshing around and taking a longer path, but some of the magic was escaping into the air instead of going to Carl. That was the best possible outcome I could have hoped for. Now I just needed to do all that on all the other active channels. I couldn't just keep sending over miners the way they were, as I'd soon run out of magic. I needed them to be stronger and more durable. It was time to go back to their template and subdivide their triangles even more. Chapter 47, Slosh Lines. I had Penny pull up a template for me to work on, and I was about to get started when I decided to take a moment and see if there was anything I was missing. Each subdivision of the triangles was taken twice as long, so I was going to be working on the minor template for several hours. If I wanted to make any changes, it would be best to do it now. I looked over the minor again, and something seemed to tickle the back of my brain, but I couldn't quite figure out what it was. Penny, you've seen me make these minors several times before. I feel like I'm missing something. Do you know what it is? You've been focused on them moving through stone, Penny said, but if you want to sabotage the rest of the cave, it'd be much better if they could just fly to where they needed to be. OMG, I exclaimed. Jetpacks. Yep, Penny nodded. You need to add a jetpack. How on earth did I forget that, I wondered. I think you're doing very well for a human, Penny said helpfully, especially as you aren't operating at full capacity. Just how far below full capacity was I? T, I called. I'm here, he replied cheerfully. How can I help? Penny says I'm not running at full capacity at the moment, but I feel fine. I'm not ready to jump up and run a marathon or anything, but I do feel normal. Are you still keeping my body sedated? Oh, yes, T replied. You're out of the danger level, as you now have access to fresh air, but I'm still keeping all your systems heavily repressed. If I didn't, you'd be very hungry, desperate to pee, and full of energy. Since you can't move much, that would be a recipe for disaster. Oh, I replied, I hadn't thought of that. He nodded sagely. You can still think and use magic, but you're not going to be as clear-headed or innovative as you usually are. That is an unfortunate byproduct of what I'm doing for you physically. At this point, keeping you alive and calm is more important than being creative. You might not come up with the best solution, but you seem to be doing well so far. As long as you keep working towards your freedom, you should be alright. He was right. I felt physically calm, which was a lot better than going crazy. I also hadn't thought about peeing, but I'd need to work on that at some point. I wasn't hungry either, which was very unusual for me. I was always snacking on something. Sometimes I wondered if my stomach was a bottomless pit. T, do you know why I'm hungry all the time? I asked. I'd always thought it was a bit unusual, but I just figured it was part of the amazing body that T had forged for me. It seemed like all supernaturals ate a lot, but I seemed to eat more than most. It's the magic in your matrix, he said, like that explained everything. Seeing my look of confusion, he continued with his explanation. You've packed a lot of magic into your aura, but your body hasn't developed enough to support it. You haven't been a supernatural for very long, and your cells are mostly regular human cells with a little bit of magic in them. So the magic in your matrix is affecting your physical body and forcing it to perform at the highest level. This burns out your cells a lot faster, and as a result, you're having to eat like a growing kitten to replace them. Oh, well, that explains a lot, I said. So will this eventually go away? I would think so, T replied wisely. Every new cell you're making can handle slightly more magic than before. Eventually your body will catch up and you'll be in balance again. How long will that take, I wondered. I don't know, T said. You've continued to increase the density of your matrix, so that just puts your body even farther behind. That isn't a bad thing, as it's forcing your physical being to improve much faster than a normal mage. You haven't been around a lot of naturals, but I would guess you're improving faster than a regular natural as well. I've compensated for this as much as I can by making sure you're in top shape and all your body functions are performing as perfectly as possible. Well, that was interesting. The new matrix I'd made at the gathering was 21 times denser than my old matrix. I guess that meant I'd eat like a pig for a long time. It also meant I needed to fix my food situation at some point, or I was going to waste away. That was a problem for later. For now, I needed to get my miners upgraded. Thank you so much, T, for all your help, I told him sincerely. You continue to amaze me with just how good you are. It is my purpose, he said, and swept into a deep bow. He seemed calm, but I could tell by the way he smiled that he liked the acknowledgement. He swung away and I turned my focus back to Penny and Eggie. Okay, so I need to add a jetpack. Is there anything else we should include? I've been thinking, Penny spoke up, and I believe this would be an excellent time to add the Force Rune. The Force Rune, duh. I was breaking through rock. It doesn't get more forceful than that. I'd suggest putting the speed version of the Force Rune on the jetpack, Eggie continued, and your attack version of the Force Rune on the pickaxe. Eggie, I'm so glad you're my thinker, I exclaimed. That is an excellent idea. I gave him a big hug as he buzzed at Penny and Stone speak and hugged me back. Then I gave Penny a big hug too. Both of them were just awesome. I couldn't think of anything else, so I went back to the Temple of the Miner and got to work. Making a jetpack in full detail was fun. Heck, making a rocket in any form was always fun. I'd made a simple single-tube jetpack before, but this time I decided to add wings. My design was similar to Buzz Lightyear from Toy Story, but I made the jetpack part bigger and covered it in red with white stripes. Colored it red with white stripes. I added the speed version of the Force Rune as a logo and then covered it in 2 layers of triangles. When I was done, it was just as dense with detail as the rest of the miner. Then I stamped the attack version of the Force Rune to the base of his pickaxe. Finally, I gave the miner another patch on his chest with the basic version of the Force Rune on it. Surely, between the 3 of them, he should have all the force he needed. I made sure the new patch and stamp were triangled up, and then Penny saved what I had so far. Adding the rocket and patches had brought me up to 7,192 triangles. Now it was time to split all those triangles in half again. There was no way I could do this in one shot, so I ended up taking little breaks. I ran around my throne room a few times and kept an eye on what was happening in the main room. Bermuda wanted to be near me as I worked, so I got in the habit of lounging in the cat bed and working on the template in the air above me. Sometimes he would lay on my chest, and sometimes he'd lay in the bed beside me. When I got frustrated with how long all this was taking, or got upset at what was going on in the room above, Bermuda would start purring and give me some gentle licks. He knew when I wasn't in a good emotional place, and in his own way, he told me he loved me and we were going to be all right. Penny and Eggy got in the habit of coming over and joining us, and the cat bed turned into quite the cuddle puddle. I was very aware of how lucky I was to have this much support and encouragement. Carl finished draining the woman that Marius had messed with, and she crumbled into dust. Only one student remained, and he seemed resigned to his fate. Carl spent a long time packing magic into his body. It seemed like twice as long as before, and I thought he'd then start draining the last guy. Instead, he had the guy do some housework. Carl made him clean the dust out of the circle, which I thought was just cruel. It was sort of like making the guy dig his own grave. After that, Carl had him clean up the room and get rid of the trash. Then he sent the guy out for food, and the student came back with burgers, fries, and drinks. It was just 2 meals, though. I guess they figured there wasn't any reason to spend money on their last victim. After they ate, Carl opened up one of the crates and took out a metal crest. After they ate, Carl opened up one of the crates and took out a metal crest. It looked old, like it had been a family heirloom for a long time, and it glowed with a touch of magic. It wasn't a lot, but Carl put it in the sucker circle and drained its power anyway. I was surprised he hadn't moved on to the last mage, but I wondered if maybe he needed a break from stealing magic. Surely draining items was a lot easier than draining a person. Carl went through several crates of items and had the student clean up behind him. None of the items had much power, but he was gradually taking longer and longer to do whatever internal body enhancing he was attempting. Finally, Carl and Marius decided to call it a night, and they went to sleep on the cots. Carl told the student to stand in the corner and not move, so that is what he did for the whole time they were resting. I couldn't imagine what it would be like to just stand there, knowing at some point you were going to be sacrificed for your powers. I kept working on the miners and finally finished it. Penny saved the new template and reported it now had 14,384 triangles. Hopefully that level of detail would be enough to do the trick. I made 20 of them, filled them with magic, and sent them off. They had doubled the triangles, but they only took about 20% more magic to fill. That was nice, as I was starting to worry about how much magic it was going to take to sabotage this circle. I don't know if it was the extra detail, the jetpacks, or the force rune that made the difference, but they flowed so easily through the stone. It was almost like they were fish swimming through water. It was certainly a far cry from the painful, slow phasing we'd started out with. The miners reached the sucker circle and got started. I had all of them tackle one channel and dig out the sloshing dips. It only took a minute, and then they were done. More importantly, they didn't take that much damage. I directed them to tackle the next channel, and while they were busy with that, I made 20 more miners. Soon I had 10 work crews, adding slosh lines to the rune and all its logical connections. Carl and Marius were still sleeping, so I just kept going. I increased the number of work crews to 40, and then started calling the damaged miners back for repairs and refills. There were a lot of channels, and it was a bigger job than I anticipated, but I got finished just before Carl and Marius woke up. The student had been standing in the corner all night, so I'm sure he was exhausted, but they sent him out for breakfast anyway. When he got back, Carl and Marius ate their breakfast sandwiches and then began their day by draining the last student. He started crying when Carl told him to get into the circle. The poor guy shook like a leaf, but he had to obey. Carl started the circle and sat back, staring off into space as usual. This time, though, all the magic didn't flow to him. Instead, a mist of magic lifted off the circle and started floating through the air. It seemed like a lot, and I was worried it was too much. My slosh lines were working, but maybe they were working too well. Much of the magic in the channel was flowing over the edges and turning into vapor. It almost looked like the last mage was standing in a patch of dry ice. Surely Carl would see all this magic and investigate. Was he going to figure out I was still alive? Was he going to blast through the rock and come for me? I waited, but nothing happened. Carl kept staring off into space, and Marius kept playing a game on his phone. Surely someone was going to notice. Nobody did, not even the mage that was losing his magic. I bore silent witness to his passing and memorized his face so I could tell his story. I had to get out of here. I was going to go crazy if I had to watch this play out over and over again. More importantly, I needed to get to the rest of my crew, come back here, and put a stop to this. I called all the rest of the miners to me and upgraded them to the latest template. This time I didn't even go out to my physical space. Instead, I did it all from my throne room. I was starting to get a handle on using my magic and my sight while in this special place. Carl and Marius left and returned shortly with 6 more students. The whole awful process repeated all over again. It seemed to be getting harder for Carl to pack the magic inside him, so they only got through 3 students before going to sleep again. Marius played on his phone until he got bored, and then he played with his victims. He liked to get them to do what he wanted without having to command them. It was more of a challenge, I'm sure, and he liked to see how far he could push them. Sex, violence, just plain stupid stuff. Nothing was off the table. He made one male student have sex with every woman remaining, both the men and the women, and then afterwards eat their underwear and socks. He made another woman stand on one leg the whole time. It was like they were dolls and he was a depraved child playing with them. I began to hate him more than Carl. At least Carl didn't play with his tools. He only wanted one thing from them, their magic, and he killed them to get it. Other than that, he left them alone. Carl was psychotic, but it was Marius who was cruel. I did all I could. I memorized their faces and bore witness to their final moments. When I told their stories, I wasn't going to say anything about what they did for Marius. Instead, I was just going to say they were brave and fought till the end. I kept working on my own efforts to escape. After updating all the miners, I spent time with the ass blasters. I added the speed version of the force rune to all their feet and gave them the generic version of the force rune as well. Then I did another subdivision of their triangles, bringing their triangle count up to 12,846. I upgraded all the working ass blasters and then reviewed my progress. The speed of the excavation had jumped a lot. If I focused on just one miner, it seemed like they were chewing through the rock at a good pace. If I zoomed out and focused on the full 18 feet of rock I needed to get through, it seemed like the progress was barely happening. Even with all the upgrades, it was going to take days to escape. I just had to accept that and move on. Instead of focusing on the tragedy that was happening overhead, I needed to focus on what I could control. And one thing I really needed to control was a way to replenish my magic. I'd started the situation with a lot of magic in the tank. Both Penny and I had been full and ready to go. Every upgrade of my soul creations had taken more of my capacity, though, and I'd already borrowed from Penny several times. We still had a lot left, but all this mining was taking power, so I was worried how much magic I'd have when it came to finishing this tunnel. The good news was there was now a lot of loose magic in the air, and that meant it was time for my granny godmothers to make an appearance. I wanted to sabotage the place even more, but first I needed to make sure my own escape was going well. I'd worked with my grannies for a long time, so they were very familiar to me. I created the template of a granny godmother in front of me and started filling in the details. I began with a plump female figure with gray hair worn in the back in a bun. She'd blah. I began with a plump female figure with gray hair worn in a bun in the back. She'd had a pink dress last time in honor of Annabeth, but this time I went with bright red. She was helping me go into battle against some nasty mages, so I needed her to have lots of fire and sass. I debated giving her something special, like a jetpack instead of fairy wings, but I decided to stick with what worked. She'd mostly be moving through the air slowly, cleaning it up, so she really didn't need speed. I gave her apron a nice frilly edge and covered it in images of apple pie. In this place of rotten magic, she was going to need all the wholesome goodness she could get. For her weapons, I stayed with the dual dustbusters and the fancy hip canisters which had the vortex cleaning system and a chrome-plated exhaust. I didn't add the western holsters this time. Instead, I doubled the size and power of the canisters and gave her a clip on the side to hang her dustbusters when she wasn't using them. With all the stolen magic flying around, things were quickly going to get nasty, so I really wanted to design something that would protect her. I came up with the idea of a force-filled belt. I made it silver and gold with the big gold sun on the front. It would project a force field of golden goodness all around her. I added my defensive force rune on the belt, included the speed version of the force rune on her wings, and then put the generic force rune on her dustbusters. I gave her a last go-over, then remembered to give her regular gloves and a protective mask. Then I remembered to give her a duplicator ring and a resized ring. Did I need anything else? Finally, I added a feather duster in case she needed to brush the bad dust off her outfit, as well as a cleaning rag and a squirt bottle of disinfectant. Oh, and sensible shoes. She was a fairy, but she was a worker too. Hopefully she was now good for every situation. Penny saved her basic form, and then I got to work on my first triangle pass. Once again, being that up close and personal with the template gave me all kinds of opportunities to add more detail. On the chrome vortex canisters, I added scrollwork and gems to give them an extra kick. For her wings, I added all those little lines that make dragonfly wings so pretty. For her apple pie apron, I made sure all the apple pies looked fresh, hot, and ready to eat. When I was done, I was familiar with every part of my soul creation, and I'd given her as much power and protection as I could. Penny saved her again and reported the triangle count was 3,578. It seemed like these first passes of mine were getting a lot more detailed than before. I did the first subdivision pass, giving me 7,156 triangles, and then I summoned my head granny godmother. "Why, hello," she said brightly. "I didn't expect to meet you so soon." "I didn't expect to need you so quickly, but things have changed. I hope you are rested and ready to go." I gave her a big smile. "Of course," she replied. "You know I'm always happy to help. Now, what are we dealing with this time?" My goodness, it was nice to have her back again. We'd always had an easy relationship, and it was wonderful to just tell her my story and let her know what was going on. "Well, you've certainly had quite the adventure," she said sympathetically, "and it's not over yet. Cleaning the air here is going to be a bit of a challenge, as all the stolen magic will be fresh. It's going to be upset and ready to lash out at someone or something. With the park, it had already turned rotten, and it was slimy and acidic, but it wasn't actively upset. Still, this new upgrade you've given me is right spiffy. I'm certainly stronger than before. I guess we'll get started and see how we do." I told her to let me know if she needed anything, and that she had at least one more upgrade coming. She just nodded and flew off. My granny godmothers were sweet and easy to talk to, but they liked to be working if there was a job that needed doing. I summoned 10 more godmothers and sent them her way. I didn't bother giving them instructions, as the head granny godmother would fill them in and get them started. I took a moment to look around and see if anything was happening. Carl and Marius were sleeping. The 3 remaining students of the second batch were standing against the wall. Everything seemed quiet. so I decided to do one more pass on the grannies and get them up to the same level as the miners. Splitting the triangles to get 7,000 new ones took time, but I was getting used to it now. I varied the shades of color, and once again the final product just sparkled. She looked like a real fairy. Final triangle count 14,302. I called all my working grannies back and upgraded them. Then I had a quick chat with the head grandmother to see how it was going. This magic is much worse to collect and clean compared to the magic in the park, she reported. Remember how it wanted to burn you when the rotten mage first exploded? I nodded. That had been a nasty dash for freedom. I had been carrying Annabeth's unconscious body with me, and the grannies had sacrificed themselves to clear a path for us to run through. This magic is like that, only worse, she stated. It's a good thing we started our cleaning now, or this could have gotten really bad. You're in the floor, but you still have to breathe the same air as the rest of them. You can't get away, so the magic would have eventually eaten through your lungs. That's why I'm very glad you're here, I told her warmly. Not only will you keep me safe from the air, but you'll keep Carl from realizing something is wrong. Of course, dear, she said with a smile. Now, I think I'm going to need a few more fairies to keep up with what the circle is creating. I don't know if the mages he's sacrificing are getting stronger, or if the magic is getting more, or if the circle is getting more out of whack. But there is definitely more magic coming off of it. I nodded and quickly doubled her workforce. This was magic well spent. Oh, before I leave, I wanted to let you know I've been giving the cleaning magic directly to Penny. For the park cleanup, we gave the magic to Aqua, as she was needed to then pass on the magic to Sandy, Annabeth, Eggy, and the house. For you, we can just give the magic to Penny directly. I thanked her for all her help, and then she flew away. I checked Penny's color saturation levels. They were good. If the grannies were giving her pure neutral magic, I needed to counter that with my soul colors and make sure Penny stayed in top shape. I checked back into the room. The evil duo was awake and draining another mage. I memorized his face and bore silent witness for a moment. It was hard to look at, and it was hard to see the two remaining mages standing there, knowing they were next. At one point, Marius put down his phone and got up to start playing with them. I couldn't watch anymore, so I called Penny and Eggy together to have a planning session and figure out our next moves. Okay, you both know what's going on, I said. I can breathe. Progress is being made on the escape tunnel, and we now have a source of neutral magic. Am I missing anything? Is there anything else I need to be working on at the moment? Eggy and I have actually been discussing this already. Penny spoke up. You should check in with T more often and make sure you're getting the right amount of water, as well as taking care of your bathroom needs. Just because you're doing the whole comatose kung fu monk thing doesn't mean you don't have to take care of yourself. Your normal feelings of hunger and thirst are going to be messed up, so you need to check with T to make sure you stay healthy. T, I called. Did you hear all that? Yes, of course, he replied. I always pay attention to what you're doing. I never know when you're going to suddenly drink a highly potent magical cocktail and poison yourself. I just laughed. You got me there. That wasn't my finest hour. So what do you think about what Penny said? Am I doing okay? You could do with both water and food. You don't need a lot, but you need some. Plus, you're going to need to pee and poop in the next several hours. I've been keeping your system sedated, but it's going to need to happen at some point. Well, damn. I'd completely forgotten about that. This was something I was looking forward. This was not something I was looking forward to. I really, really wished I had a freshness charm that worked for me. That would make it so much easier. How the hell did I even begin to tackle this? Eggy cleared his throat to get my attention. If I may, he said. I nodded for him to continue. I've been thinking about this, and I would like to suggest you use your throne room for these functions. He leaned back like that explained everything. I just looked at him in confusion. You want me to poop on the floor of my throne room? I asked in disbelief. Oh, goodness, no, he said with distaste. This is your magic space, so use it as such. Just add a bathroom, add intention to what it does with your waste, and then go about your business. Oh, I said thoughtfully. Will that work? It's worth a try, Penny chimed in. We already know you can reach out of this throne room and affect the physical world. You're doing it by changing up your creations, and you're doing it with your magic sight. So why can't it help you with eating, drinking, and your restroom needs? Well, that was certainly an intriguing idea. Going to the restroom here seemed much nicer than trying to figure out how to do it in the physical world. I won't go into all the details as this is neither glorious nor exciting, glamorous or exciting, but I will say it worked. Using my intention, I transmuted number one into pure water. I wasn't going to drink it, so I had the dudes transport it to the main room and sprinkle it on the crates. For number two, I transmuted that into solid, very dense chips, and I had the dudes take that top side and put it onto Carl and Marius's cots. They were both nasty people, so they could sleep on shit. The chips were hard, like rock, and they didn't smell, but it was the thought that counted. The best part was, I didn't have to monitor any of this. Instead, I made a door in my throne room that led to a small but clean restroom and did my business there. Easy peasy. The potty thing worked out so well, I decided to tackle food and water next. Water was easy. I just called for a drink in my throne room, and my dudes airlifted it to me from the cavern below. For food, I just transmitted rock chips into dense, nutritional bites of food. From the throne room perspective, I was eating a delicious sandwich. Once I had everything set up, I breathed a sigh of relief. I was finally in a good place. All my basic needs of air, shelter, water, and food were taken care of. I had a plan to escape and a source of magic to keep me going. Now it was finally time to get back to something I was very much looking forward to, sabotaging this place. To that end, I called a council of war. I'm sure... hang on. To that end, I called a council of war. I'm sure it didn't look like a planning meeting, as I was snuggled at Bermuda on the cat bed, and Penny and Eggy were all laid up with us. But this was my new favorite spot, and where we were going to plan the downfall of Carl and Marius. Penny, as you suggested before... Penny, you suggested this before, but now it's time. How are we going to sabotage this cave? I'm open to any suggestions, no matter how crazy. I'm sure you've already thought about this and have hundreds of ideas. So let's hear them. What you got? Penny and Eggy looked at each other and buzzed in stone speak. Then they turned back to me and Penny sighed. We've discussed this a lot, and as you've surmised, but the only workable thing we've come up with is to carve out a chunk of the ceiling and drop it on their heads. I waited, expecting to hear more, but that was it. That's all they had. Really? I prompted. Your only idea is to drop rocks on their heads? Even that isn't as easy as it sounds, Aggie spoke up. You've got to cut the rock so it's ready to fall, but doesn't. Then you've got to get the timing just right, so at least one of them is below that portion of the ceiling when it falls. Then you have to hope it will hit them and do damage. Then you have to figure out what to do with the other mage that isn't injured yet. I couldn't believe this. I'll just cut out part of the ceiling and drop it on them, I said shortly. I mean, really, how hard can that be? In my mind, it was so simple. Person walks under the sabotage part of the ceiling. Ceiling falls on the person dies. End of story. Oh, my source, Aggie said in a tone that suggested I was being particularly dense. Allow me to illustrate. And illustrate he did. He formed a hologram in the air and showed all the different ways it could fail. Carl walked under the sabotage section. The miners couldn't dig through the part holding it attached fast enough, and Carl kept going. The rock falls behind him. He finds me and kills me. Carl goes to walk under the sabotage part, but it isn't attached well to the rest of the rock, so it falls early. He finds me and kills me. Carl goes to walk under the sabotage part, but the rock doesn't fall straight, so it gets wedged into the ceiling. Carl finds me and kills me. Carl goes to walk into the sabotaged part, and it falls mostly straight and hits him. But he's looking down at the time, so it only hits part of his head and shoulders. The angle of the blow knocks him to the side. He recovers, finds me, and kills me. Aggie went on and on with ways it could go wrong. I was totally shocked as I could see all the problems he was talking about. In the movies, the character creates all these amazing ambushes and they work perfectly. If this was scripted, Carl and Marius would both stand under the same spot, smoking, and the rock would fall on them just right. Their heads would go splat, and depending on the movie rating, we'd have brains and blood everywhere. This wasn't real life, though, as Aggie was demonstrating over and over again. I always knew I liked him, my analytical side said proudly. He's doing such a wonderful job explaining how naive you are. Be sure and take in as much as you can. He's thinking like an engineer. Maybe some of that brain power will rub off on you. He spit on a tissue and made like he was going to rub my forehead. I guess so I could get better reception to Aggie's thoughts. I just growled and pushed him away. I guess you've already worked all this out then, I asked. Oh, no, sorry, he shrugged. You're the creative one. You'll have to figure it out. Well, that wasn't much help at all. I mentally sighed and continued to watch Aggie run through his scenarios. Once he was finished, they both looked at me again. Aggie, I certainly appreciate your thoughts, I told him, and you have certainly put a lot of time and effort into this. Penny, do you have anything you want to add? I'm very upset. I'm very sorry I got your hopes up, she said sadly. I know how much you were looking forward to getting your MacGyver on. I thought it would be simple to do something that would really hurt them and take them out. Aggie's been around a lot longer than I have, though, and he has a lot of experience to draw from. He's quickly educated me on the reality of traps, and it's certainly not as easy as it sounds. Most of the time they don't work, and since you can't get away, whatever traps you come up with need to destroy them. If it doesn't work, it will just alert them that you're still alive, and they'll come after you. Thank you both, I said sincerely. I've learned a lot just watching all the different ways this could fail. I know I'm not thinking my best, but I'm good at puzzles. Let me percolate on this for a moment and see what I can come up with. I'd really hoped to have something as awesome as the rolling ball of death in Indiana Jones, or maybe spikes that shot out of the wall and impaled them, or dungeon traps like an RPG game. I already knew Aggie would tear those ideas apart. There was no way to make a giant rolling ball. I didn't have any way to shoot spikes out of the wall, and the little bit of stone I tried to shoot at Big Ugly showed just how inaccurate that was. As for dungeon traps, those actually just made a flash on the screen and take away health points. If I could take away Carl's health points, I'd have done that already. I sighed and just let that go. I wasn't going for epic. I was going for practical. I didn't get any points for style, so I needed to make something that would have a very good chance of seriously hurting or killing them. Dropping part of the ceiling on them was practical. I already knew I could mine through stone, and I just needed gravity and weight to work. Cave rock was certainly heavy enough, and as far as I knew, gravity wasn't going anywhere. Most of the issues Aggie brought up involved timing and targeting. I let the puzzle pieces float around in my head, and it wasn't long before they started lining up. I wasn't the smartest guy in the world, but I sure enjoyed putting ideas together. One solution led to another, and soon I had a plan. Okay, I got it, I said confidently. Aggie, all of your scenarios involve Carl walking under a certain part of the ceiling. But what if we didn't try and hit him on the move? What if we hit him when he was stationary and, most importantly, not paying attention? Or even better, what if Marius was in exactly the same position? That would simplify the trap a lot, Eggy nodded. Then all we need to do is hit them when they're sleeping, I said simply. Now, here's my specific plan. I summoned a hologram of my own. First, we set up a large part of the ceiling to drop on them. I showed in glowing lines where the miners were going to chip out. I made the slabs so they were really large, about 3 feet wide by 8 feet long by about 2 foot deep. It needed to be big, so I had a good chance of hitting them even if the cots moved a bit. That amount of rock should weigh about 8,000 pounds, so it should be wide enough and heavy enough to hold them in place for a second hit. I outlined an even deeper block of stone. This was a few inches smaller on each side, so it could fall through where This was a few inches smaller on each side, so it could easily fall through where the first chunk had been, but this time I made it 6 feet deep. If my calculations were right, that would be about 18,000 pounds of rock, or about the weight of 5 large cars. Next, we finish the tunnel, and I get out of the ground and behind the wall. Then we wait until they're sleeping, Then we wait until they're sleeping. I updated my hologram to keep up with my story. At this point, all the miners are freed up, so they can chew through the last bit of rock easily. If it gets stuck somehow, we'll have lots of miners to unstick it. Priority will be to hit Carl first, as he is the fighter and reacts the fastest. Behind that, we'll hit Marius. I updated my hologram so the slab of rock fell from the ceiling and smashed into a sleeping Carl. A split second behind that, the second slab of rock fell and hit Marius. If the first one is a success, we drop the second larger set of slabs. I updated my hologram so the huge blocks of cave stones fell and smashed the first slab. At this point, we wait and see what's going to happen. If that takes care of our 2 villains, then we just go through the man-made wall, exit the cave, and go home. If the rocks miss them for some reason, or they react quickly enough to get out of the way, or anything like that, then I don't go into the room at all. Instead, I leave the man-made wall alone and head down the cave passage. Once I get beyond the magic barrier, I can use my surfer dudes to explore the rest of the cave system and hopefully find another tunnel to the surface. I looked back at Penny and Eggy. Thoughts? It's simple, clean, and you have a plan if it doesn't work, Eggy said happily. I like it. Penny thought it sounded wonderful too, and then we all talked about possible failure points and how to account for them. There weren't many of them, and soon Penny and Eggy got up like the meeting was over. You know, there are many types of sabotage and traps, I said with an evil grin. Oh, Eggy sounded intrigued, and they sat back down again. Do tell. Well, you've rightly pointed out all the different ways that physical traps could fail, I said. But these are mages, so what about if we break their tools? Mages are a lot less powerful if they don't have their charms. That's an excellent idea, Penny sounded excited. Are you sure we can do that? I think so, I said. I've just modified a giant charm circle, so surely I can mess up a regular charm. I know it's not normally attempted, as charms are valuable, and the attacking mage is usually hoping to keep them himself. In this case, I just want Carl and Marius dead, and I'm happy to destroy all their charms to do it. Carl's been around a long time, so I'm sure he's collected a bunch of charms to help him, Penny continued. Even if you only broke his shield charm, that would hurt his fighting chances. He recovered with the healing charm, so break that too. I'm sure he has a freshness charm. Break that and then sabotage the restroom in the warehouse. He won't be feeling very fresh anymore. Penny was getting excited now. You need to do it in such a way that it doesn't lead back to you, Aggie cautioned. If all of his charms start breaking at once, he's going to know something is up. You're right, I said, so I was thinking of messing with the part of the charm that holds the neutral magic. He's draining the magic out of people, so it could make sense if his charms got drained of their power too. He'd just think it was some sort of side effect of this new magical thing he's trying. That is just plain devious, Aggie laughed. Penny joined him, and soon all three of us were doing the whole lemony snicket, evil, mischievous chuckle. Or the lemony snicket, mischievous chuckle. We weren't evil, but right now it sure felt good to be a bit naughty. Penny and Eggy were still doing their rascally snickering as they got to their feet, thinking the meeting was over. And of course, what's a good sabotage without some balls? I asked mysteriously. Balls? Eggy questioned as he sat back down again. I could already see the wheels turning in his head, and he tried. What? I could already see the wheels turning in his head as he tried to figure out where I was going with that. Balls, Penny said playfully as she sat down too. Fleshy people love them. Men especially. They throw them, kick them, bounce them, and that's just their games. Personally, they scratch them, hold them, adjust them, squeeze them. It's all very fascinating. Did you know they do something called tea bagging and it has nothing to do with tea? Really? Aggie said curiously. That sounds intriguing. All right, you two, I said quickly before the conversation got out of hand. Let's focus on sabotage, not strange things people do. Now, this next idea is something of an experimental one, but if it works, it could give us a huge advantage. I paused dramatically. I'm going to call it Marius Suckballs. I love the name. Loved it. I got to diss Marius and use a pun at the same time. Win-win. That is an excellent name, Penny laughed. Are you going to do something like a nut flick? I hear that's quite painful. Penny had always been interested in stuff fleshy people did, but she seemed very well versed in testicular culture. Where had she learned all this? No, Penny, I laughed. It's nothing like that. What I'm thinking of doing is using the sucker rune to pull some of the magical capacity out of Marius. My idea is to use a little ball which gradually inflates as it fills up with magic. Sort of fills up with his magic. Sort of like bubble gum. It keeps going until it pops, at which point the granny godmothers suck it up and convert it to neutral magic. That sounds like an excellent idea, Aggie said thoughtfully. Are you sure you can do that? It's unlike anything you've attempted before. This is the most experimental of the sabotages, I admitted, so I'm not 100% sure it will work. On the other hand, the reason this whole war started in the first place was because mages with the sucker rune could pull from each other with no limit. It sounds like the rune is always on and they have no control over who taps into it. So it just makes sense that I could make it sucker runes and tap into it as well. The logic is sound, Aggie noted. You call them Marius Suckballs. Or you called them Marius Suckballs. So are you just going to pull from Marius? Why not tackle both of them? Marius is the one holding all the magic, so he's the one I want to go after. He's used to Carl pulling and pushing magic into him all the time, so I don't think he'll notice any extra movement. Plus, he's into his game and playing with people. Carl, on the other hand, is used to controlling the flow and dominating other mages. I think he would quickly notice anything draining his small capacity. We talked over the idea a bit more, but nobody had anything new to add, so I called an end to the meeting and got to work. All right. And so the next chapter is called Unexpected Find. Chapter 48. That'll be a lot of fun. All right, guys. See you guys next Sunday. See you then. Bye.